Do you know the story behind the King James translation of the Bible? Hello, and welcome to Light Linguistics. The King James Version, sometimes shortened to KJV, is one of, if not the, most influential translation of the Christian Bible into English. It was completed in 1611 under the oversight of, as you might guess, King James. Specifically, this was King James the First and Sixth, but we don't have time to get into how King James was both the first and the sixth. For some background on that time period, Europe was in a time of religious turmoil. The Protestant Reformation of the 1500s marked a huge shift in the political and religious balances of power in Europe. There were, simplistically, two sides someone could fall on. They could be either a traditional Catholic or one of the new Protestants. Each kingdom and government and political entity needed to choose which side they fell on. And in 1534, the King of England, King Henry VIII, decided to align with the Protestants. He founded the Church of England, which was very similar to the Catholic Church, except instead of having the Pope as the head of the church, they had the King as the head of the church. There was a good bit of turmoil around this for a while, but by the time King James came into power 70 years later, Protestantism was pretty well entrenched as the state religion. That's some political background, but what about some of the religious beliefs that caused the Bible to be translated? Historically, the Catholic Church did not approve of Bible translations. They had the Bible in Latin and used it in Latin as they had for the past 1,000 years. In fact, it wasn't until the mid-1900s when the Catholic Church allowed its churches to hold Mass in languages other than Latin. But the Protestants wanted the Bible to be more accessible, and the average person couldn't speak Latin in 1500s Germany. Protestant leaders often translated the Bible into other languages, such as Martin Luther translating the Bible into German, or John Calvin overseeing the Geneva Bible into English. Yeah, the Geneva Bible in English predates the King James Version. There had been other translations of the Bible into English before the KJV, even before the Protestant Reformation. John Wycliffe translated the Bible into English in the 1300s, but he was condemned as a heretic. A few decades after Wycliffe's death, the church dug up his body and burned the bones as punishment. During and after the Reformation, there was the Tyndale Bible, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and the Geneva Bible, all of which predate the King James Version. But these were all either not official or not very well liked by the people. A lot of people liked the Geneva Bible, but it took an anti-monarchy slant on a lot of things. It often translated king as tyrant and promoted rebelling against unjust rulers, and this was doubled down on in the translator's comments and footnotes. Naturally, the king didn't like this very much and saw it as undermining his divine right to rule, and he was really concerned that it was his subjects' favorite Bible translation. And so, in 1604, he commissioned a new translation of the Bible, one that matched the Geneva Bible stylistically, but wasn't anti-monarchy. He formed a large team of translators, picked from the educated elite within the Church of England, to make this new translation. He gave direct orders to align with the doctrine of the Church of England and not contradict the king's divine right to rule, especially in the footnotes. Despite all this, the King James translators were surprisingly unbiased. Not that there's none at all, but with the king looking down on you, that's a tough goal. They used a translation strategy known as formal equivalence, which is where they try to keep everything as literal as possible, translating the form of it. This is sometimes called a word-for-word translation or a literal translation, but we tend not to use those terms because it's basically impossible to have a direct word-for-word translation. This strategy can have downsides, which is why not every translation uses it. For instance, if there's a metaphor or figurative language, that would be translated directly, word for word, but miss out on the original meaning of the passage. Something the original audience would have understood would be lost in translation. But what about their literary style? You see, English was changing significantly in that time period. The translators intentionally chose to use older English that was already outdated to make it feel older and more majestic, like how Latin felt to them. Words like thee and thou, and constructions like speaketh, that F on the end, were basically out of use by normal people at that time, but the translators chose to use them to make it feel older. In the end, after 7 years of work, the translators produced a translation that met with King James standards, so he authorized it, which is why it's historically known as the Authorized Version. It immediately became the official Bible of the Church of England, but it didn't take off with the people. They still preferred that anti-monarch Geneva Bible. But after King James banned the Geneva Bible, the KJV surged in popularity. A century and a half later, there was a revised version of the KJV published. English spelling wasn't really standardized back in 1611, so a lot of the way things were spelled would look weird to us today. And it looked weird to people in the 1700s also, so in 1769 they updated it to have modern spelling. For comparison, here's side by side the original King James and the modern spelling. See how the original used U instead of V, and used the thorn character in the word the. The KJV has gone on to be the most published Bible translation in English by far. For many, historically, it was the only translation they had access to. And so it's had substantial influence on English literature, and is considered a foundational work in the field. Now, it's not without its flaws, it's very much a product of its time, but that's to be expected. Today, it's not the translation of choice for most Bible scholars wanting to look into the original Greek and Hebrew. They use the New Revised Standard Version, or NRSV, which was translated by a large group of scholars that didn't all agree doctrinally. That translation group had Jewish scholars, Protestants, Catholics, atheists, agnostics, and other just scholars to try to remove any sort of doctrinal agenda from the translation. Which, as you might guess, makes the NRSV a little bit more objective than the King James, since there's no ruler ruling over you, telling you they will burn you alive if you disagree with them in your translation. Regardless, the KJV is very popular still today, and remains relevant today, even 400 years later. In fact, there are Protestants that hold to the King James only movement, saying that the only valid translation of the Bible is the King James Bible. So, I hope this gave you some good insight into the KJV and the story of how it came about. If you like this video and want more longer form videos like it, be sure to comment and let me know, and like this video, and then if you're not subscribed already, consider doing that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching.